South Africa is a nation at a crossroads, and it is lacking a very significant and important thing: the element of long-term planning. And with the leaders that we have, there is absolutely no way you can possibly believe we are adequately and rightly planning for the future.
That people think that if there is no water, ourselves, our families, we've got special water. We don't. We also go through, in some instances, I had to go to a certain hotel so that I have to go to my commitments. We also go through the same inconveniences like any other person. There's no special water or a special pipe that is designed to service other people and not service other people. Our families, our relatives, ourselves, our constituencies, they suffer the same pain. We don't have water when communities don't have water. But what we need to do, we've got the responsibility to fix the problem. We are coming to you that the problem is almost fixed.
I'm here to tell you right now, we don't care.
Let me tell you.
South Africa, our beloved country, is at once one of the most remarkable and one of the most troubled nations on earth. It is home to a magnificent amount of natural wealth in its minerals, in its agricultural land, and its biodiversity, and its talented people, a whole legion of them at a young age, that being millennials, Generation Z, and the generation after that. It even possesses institutions that many developed and developing countries would envy: an independent judiciary for the most part, a free press, absolutely, even though they do lean left, a sophisticated financial system, at one point the best in the world, a respected central bank, depends how you feel about central banks, and some world-class universities. It completed one of the 20th century's most extraordinary, peaceful political transitions in 1994. That's a note to those pushing that fake genocide. It averted a race war that many had predicted, and replacing it with a constitutional democracy of genuine ambition. And yet, 30 years after the end of apartheid, South Africa has not delivered the life people deserve and expected. Nearly 1 in 3 working-age adults cannot find employment. More than half the population lives below the poverty line. Children die in school toilet facilities that are little more than open pits, obviously. Violent crime extracts a toll on human life and economic potential that staggers the imagination. Water flows unreliably, or not at all, to millions of homes. The infrastructure that was allowed to decay over decades of neglect now holds back the economy like a hand around the nation's throat. It's strangling this country. These are not problems that can necessarily be solved in one electoral cycle. They accumulate over decades, some over centuries actually. They will require some strong leadership and perhaps a generation or more of patient, disciplined, well-designed effort to overcome. I don't think you believe either that the ANC and people like Panyaza Lesufi, Fikile Mbalula, and Paul Mashatile can take us to where we need to go, building over a generation in a patient, disciplined, and well-designed way. They cannot. They do not have it in them. South Africa, our beloved country, needs a national framework, a national plan, an approach as to how we are going to build and rebuild this country. Whatever is happening that is negatively affecting the population of South Africa, the people of South Africa, and however this country is falling apart is being done on purpose. This is what the ANC wants and means to do, because our problems are actually solvable in this country. They're not even that difficult, a lot of them. But to actually change a country does not happen by accident or by some guy giving a speech year after year about smart cities. It requires a willingness to plan for the long term, to invest in the futures of our children and beyond, and to look past just elections and winning elections, but to look to what this country could be in the next 99 to 500 years, and to build institutions that can sustain the effort across political cycles, no matter who's in charge. It requires the courage to be honest about the depth of the problem and what the problem really is. and stop focusing on racial tensions and old arguments we've been having for 350 years. And it takes the ambition to believe that a different South Africa is possible if we pull ourselves out of the mud. South Africa obviously doesn't lack potential. It lacks long-term planning that can unlock that potential. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description. We need to be honest. Before a nation can plan its future, it must be honest about the present. South Africa's challenges are interconnected and mutually reinforcing. They cannot be addressed one at a time in isolation because each one feeds into the other, and each demands to be understood as part of a larger system. So we need to be honest with ourselves and assess it properly as to where South Africa stands in 7 critical areas. First, the employment crisis.
This is a picture taken in Johannesburg. Cartrack is a company in Rosebank, and earlier this year they opened applications for learnerships. The resultant queue clogged up traffic across Jan Smuts Avenue as applicants stood in line for hours and hours and hours. There were 500 learnerships available, but there were 7,000 applicants.
South Africa carries one of the heaviest unemployment burdens of any nation on earth. The official unemployment rate, already an alarming figure, stood at approximately 33% in early 25 by narrow definitions, rising to over 42% among young people between the ages of 15 and 34. The jobless rate exceeds 45%, climbing up to about 60%. Every year, roughly 740,000 South Africans enter the labor market, and the economy creates nothing like enough jobs to absorb all these people. The consequences roll down through every dimension of South African life. Unemployed people cannot support their families, which deepens poverty. They cannot contribute to the tax base, which undermines the state's capacity to deliver services. They are more vulnerable to recruitment by criminal networks then. And of course, they carry some humiliation. Over time, this corrodes the social fabric and demoralizes. It's a civilizational emergency because the country is dying. South Africa's economy deindustrialized sharply in 1994 and turning to social grants. As the country integrated into the global markets, the new government that was not up to the task, shedding the manufacturing jobs that could have employed low-skilled workers at scale. Add to that the apartheid era's deliberate spatial design, placing black townships far from economic centers. The new government has not worked on the transport system.
Public transport in the Western Cape has been described as dysfunctional and often dangerous. Many working class people in areas such as Mitchell's Plain and Khayelitsha still don't have access to trains. In fact, the Central Line has been down for over a year. Taxis are often their only solution, but some people fear for their safety.
And the job-seeking system. Where is the sort of place you can walk into an office and ask, this is who I am, I'm unemployed, I'm 30 years old, I'm 25, I'm 18, I'm looking for a job. Are there any jobs available? Some sort of centralized system that we can actually use in this country that exists in many other countries like the United Kingdom. The labor market in South Africa is also difficult. Allegedly designed to protect workers, have made formal employment expensive and risky, incentivizing capital-intensive rather than labor-intensive productions, meaning people would rather use a machine than a person.
I believe that it's a real concern, generally, to be really transparent about it. You know, when we talk about labor market policy, they reckon that for 1% increase in GDP, there's a 0.5% increase in employment. So we've got employment increasing, for argument's sake, by 60,000 jobs a year, because our GDP is below 1% growth. But you know, the actual number of new entrants into the labor market is 600,000 to 700,000 people every year coming out of school, etc. We then add to that the truth of the matter, like the automotive industry, these massive disruptions, retrenchments taking place, the Chinese factor in that context. Then we add artificial intelligence, automation, and new technologies, and one can't help generally but wonder if this is not just another step for organizations to potentially automate processes, look at new technologies, rather than employ, because of the competitive pressures.
42% of the working age population has not completed secondary education, and as many as 52% drop out of school and never reach grade 12. South Africa needs sustained economic growth of at least 3.5% per annum, which is per year, to make a meaningful dent in unemployment by 2030. The current growth is forecasted at about 0.8 or 1.4 maximum. This is less than a quarter of what's required. Shows you how much we need long-term planning. And I'm telling you now, the ANC is not up to the job.
I just came in now. I'm from mining Indaba, where I raised issues of water in that mining Indaba to say the mining houses, they are using a lot of water. But when they leave that site in terms of their mining, they don't bring back the water and our license. And that leads to illegal mining, which use water. And when they use that water, they don't pay anywhere, and they make communities not to have water. And I've made an appeal to all the mining houses, especially here in Gauteng, to say they must partnership with all our municipalities.
You could do so. You want.
The second area, for nearly 2 decades, South Africa's electricity system, dominated by the state utility, has been the handbrake of national progress and economic growth. At its worst in 2023, the country suffered 289 days of rolling power cuts, representing tens of billions of rands on lost output, destroyed investment, and shattered businesses. So tell me, who would want to invest in a country like this? The ANC has caused this.
Illegal mining, which use water.
The causes of Eskom's collapse are multiple, brought on by the ANC and mutually reinforcing. They work off each other and they hold each other up. A poorly maintained aging fleet of coal power stations and a financing structure that has saddled the state with guarantees equivalent to trillions of rands. State-guaranteed debt for Eskom has driven public debt from 28% of GDP in 2007 to 76%.
This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently.
This shows how important Eskom is to this country and how getting electricity right, how important that is. As of late, there has been cautious optimism about load shedding because it's eased dramatically from March 2024, and Eskom recorded its first profit in nearly a decade in 2025. The unbundling of Eskom into separate generation, transmission, and distribution entities is underway, which is something the ANC was told to do many times since the mid-2000s, perhaps even earlier.
Welcome back. Now, later today, Stats SA will release electricity generation data for the month of November. Thanks to a turnaround at Eskom, the country's energy availability factor has improved from around 56% in 2023 to nearly 65% currently. The unbundling of the power utility is the next step in its turnaround plan.
South Africa as well does not need to be flirting or toying with the idea of so-called clean or renewable energy. We don't need to do that. That's completely unnecessary. What we should be focusing on is coal, gas, hydro, and most importantly, nuclear. And let the clean energy be sorted out by the greenies and independent business people. And if it proves to be superior, then and only then will we turn to use it. But we need to ground our country in those 4 that have worked for a century or more. The third crisis, as if we don't have enough already with the first two. Yet it receives a fraction of the attention that energy commands. The statistics are becoming alarming. Government's own assessment shows that 52% of water systems fail or barely pass quality tests, and 64% of wastewater treatment plants are classified as high risk. That's why all those people were getting sick in Hammanskraal all those years ago.
Our people have the right to clean running water. And in this case, we will admit where we have failed you. We have failed the people of Hammanskraal. We have failed you. Even though investigations are still being made to investigate and to find out exactly what led to the death of people and where the source of this cholera was. The fact that you don't have clean running water is enough for us to be extremely concerned about the exercise of your rights as the people of our country.
The water crisis has two distinct dimensions. The first is bulk supply infrastructure, which means the dams, the pipelines, the treatment facilities needed to deliver raw water. Here the government has committed significant resources. Nearly about 156 billion has been allocated for major water projects, including 42 billion for the Lesotho Highlands Phase 2 scheme.
Lesotho is keen to get the second phase of the Lesotho Highlands water project going, as it will provide much-needed boost to Lesotho's economy and provide huge benefits to South Africa. The treaty authorizing the second phase was signed in 2011, and the Lesotho Highlands water project is expecting an official launch towards the end of this year.
The second element is municipal distribution. What happens to the water after it reaches cities and towns? By mid-2024, municipal debt to water boards had reached 22 billion, rising 156% in only 5 years. Municipalities received 62 billion annually from Treasury for water and sanitation, but this funding is not ring-fenced and is routinely diverted to other purposes. The result is a country that has, in some cases, spent billions building infrastructure to deliver water and then allowed that water to leak away, be stolen through legal connections, or disappear through the financial dysfunction of local government. And South Africa's water crisis is at its core a government crisis, wearing the mask of an infrastructure crisis. Our government is not fit for long-term planning because they have let even the maintenance of what was built by the fascist apartheid regime crumble. If the fascists could deliver the water, why can't you? This is a failed liberation party. The fourth crisis we have on our hands worth highlighting is the education crisis. Education is the foundation of every good society. Every other element of long-term national strategy must rest on how you build your education.
For there is a truth that time has proven again and again. A truth I have seen written not only in books, but in the hearts of people who dared to learn, dared to rise, dared to dream. And that truth is this: education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. When I first spoke those words, I did not speak them from a place of theory or privilege. I spoke them from a life that had known change, that had known silence, that had known what it means to be denied the right to learn. I spoke them from the soil of struggle, from the fires of oppression, from a land where knowledge was forbidden to many, because those in power understood the danger of an educated mind. For an educated mind cannot be enslaved. An educated mind cannot be controlled. An educated mind questions, imagines, and ultimately transforms.
A nation that cannot educate its children cannot build a modern economy, cannot sustain democratic governance, and cannot break the intergenerational cycles of poverty that hold so many of the citizens captive. Nelson Mandela even spoke about this, but I guess they didn't listen to him. In 2024, 287 public schools were still relying solely on pit latrines.
Now, the safety of learners in many schools across Limpopo province continues to be at jeopardy as the Department of Education there grapples with the eradication of pit latrines. Over 500 schools in the province still use pit toilets 7 years after the tragic death of 4-year-old Michael Komape, who drowned in a pit toilet in Chibeng outside Polokwane. 5 more similar incidents have been reported in the last 5 years. But before we get to that package, let's take a look at this infographic and just to highlight some of these incidents of pit toilet in South Africa. Now, this is the Department of Basic Education's National Education Infrastructure Management System 2020 report, and it highlights that 3,164 schools still rely on pit toilets nationally. We have the Eastern Cape sitting at 1,243 cases, and we know that there was this diabolical incident of a school principal who coerced an 11-year-old learner to retrieve a cell phone in a pit toilet. That was absolutely horrendous. And the Free State is sitting at 122 cases. And interestingly, in Gauteng, no reported cases of pit latrine incidents in KwaZulu-Natal with 1,099 cases. Limpopo is sitting at 472, Mpumalanga 107, the Northwest Province 121. The Northern Cape and the Western Cape have got no reported incidents.
Basic sanitation facilities so dangerous that children have died falling into them. To tell you the truth, I wouldn't even drown my enemies in a pit latrine. The government has done nothing and has not responded strongly to this, not even nearly strongly enough, because they don't care. And then they want to tell us how much the apartheid regime hated black people. How about your hate for black people? We're quite aware of how much the apartheid government hated black people. The government had set multiple deadlines for eradicating these facilities. Each of them was missed. Every deadline has been missed. That just tells you everything you need to know about the future planning that is going on in the ANC. A 2024 UNICEF report listed South Africa among 20 countries, accounting for 65% of children living in severe food poverty globally, with 23% of South African children at risk of life-threatening malnutrition. This is how these children are going to school. South Africa does have some genuine educational assets. Its universities include some of the finest research institutions on the African continent and in the world. The country has a sophisticated private school sector producing world-class graduates. The mismanagement by the ANC government, who are not thinking that the future of South Africa is in these kids, we need to educate them. They're thinking, keep them as dumb and as poor as possible so that we can rule for as long as possible. To have a proper long-term plan and education system in this country that beats apartheid and the ANC, we need a different government. The ANC is incapable of that long-term planning. The fifth crisis.
For a long time, South Africa has been synonymous with violent crime, but levels have now reached a 20-year high, from murders to car hijackings. With an election this year, there is little evidence the government has a grip, with many people relying on private security instead of police.
Our crime rates in this country have been ridiculous for 30 years already. Between April 2024 and March 2025, the South African Police Service estimates that 1,100 children were murdered, an average of more than 3 per day. For what reason? In what country? In what world? What for? How in your country are 3 children murdered a day? For what? How? What is going on? Violence against women has reached epidemic proportions. The economic cost of this violence is immense and largely invisible in economic statistics. A 2015 study estimated that violence against children alone cost the country $238 billion annually in direct and opportunity cost. Crime is cited by 30% of businesses as a major constraint on investment. The private security industry, with over 2.7 million registered officers, dwarfing the 150,000 strong police service, represents a massive private tax on businesses and households who must pay for the security that the state fails to provide. The crime crisis is linked to unemployment, to inequality, and to the weakness of the government and its institutions. It is not fundamentally a policing problem, though policing matters enormously. It is what happens when a society under extreme social stress, in which millions of young men with no economic prospects and no stake in the existing order have nothing to lose. Crime rates will not fall meaningfully until the underlying conditions that generate them are addressed. The governance and corruption crisis. The South African state capture era, the systematic looting of public institutions for private benefit by politically connected networks, documented comprehensively by the Zondo Commission, inflicted damage on the country that will take a generation to repair. It hollowed out key state institutions, compromised the criminal justice system, destroyed or degraded critical infrastructure, and diverted hundreds of billions of rands from public services. The post office collapsed. Transnet, the transport utility, deteriorated into systematic dysfunction and has still not fully recovered. The governance problems are quite clear to see at municipal level. South Africa's 144 water service authorities that are financially insolvent, technically incompetent, and politically captured. Why do you think Panyaza Lesufi had to go to a hotel to bath? Poor governance and service delivery failures are not merely administrative failures. They are the primary cause of South Africa's declining quality of life. The out-of-touch ANC politician in his big mansion, in his hotel baths, in his motorcades, doing whatever he wants among all these problems and dysfunctions and this crisis. And they dance and jive and cut cakes and drink champagne while the inequality seeps in to the very hearts of the people, into every community, into the very land. Foundational to the problem of South Africa is that South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. The Gini coefficient, which is the standard measure of income inequality, stands at approximately 0.63, the highest recorded figure for any substantial nation. The richest 10% of South Africans control nearly 56% of total income. I'm a capitalist. I don't care how rich people are. The problem is that our country is not building the opportunity for anyone else to move up. They want people poor. A quarter of the population lives on less than the equivalent of $1.25 a day. That's insane in South Africa. South Africa is not that country. We should not be striving to be like any other one of these African countries out there, full of poverty and lack. There's no need for it in this country. We don't need to live like this. We need to get rid of these people because they have no long-term plans. This inequality is not random. It comes, of course, out of apartheid, but continued by the dysfunction and the bad policies of the ANC. They actively perpetuate this themselves. What apartheid did was on purpose and told you it was on purpose. What the ANC does is on purpose and acts like it's apartheid's fault. Our cities and our towns are falling apart. People have no jobs. The poor pay the highest costs for transport, for data, food. Access to jobs is difficult. Schools falling apart. Services not delivered. 3 decades after apartheid, and still we are dealing with these problems, and the best they have to offer is a social grant. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
We are here from the ANC, one love, one family, from the ANC. Ne? ANC, there is life, so one love means a lot. Ne? Thank you. Siyabonga kumama uBernie Swart. Ne? Yeah, Deputy Minister.
We know that the ANC is not fit for long-term planning and they have no idea how to do it and no intention of doing it. So let's list 7 of our own long-term priorities to get this country moving in the right direction out of the mud of poverty, disease, and decay. And a well-designed long-term plan can address multiple dimensions simultaneously. So let's look at it and set it out in 7 strategic priorities for a 30-year national plan, each grounded in what has worked in comparable countries and each matched to a specific reality of South Africa's situation. Priority 1, employment creation. The 30-year goal should be this: to reduce the broad unemployment rate from approximately 42% to below 15%. I would say nothing more than 10 ever by 2056, creating at least 500,000 net new jobs per year for a sustained period. Build a diversified, labor-intensive economic base that provides dignified livelihoods for South Africans at every skill level. Our country's unemployment crisis requires not one solution, but an entire architecture of complementary interventions. No one single policy, no matter how well designed, will create millions of jobs in a country whose spatial structure, regulatory environment, skills-based, and energy systems have been simultaneously hostile to labor-intensive growth for decades. The logic must be attack every constraint simultaneously and then scale. The most urgent structural change is spatial. South Africa must, over the next 3 decades, redesign its cities so that the poor no longer live geographically isolated from economic opportunity. This means a sustained, coordinated national program of public transport investment, not the incremental bus rapid transit projects of the past decades that actually serve to pay off the taxi bosses, but a genuine transformation on how South African cities are connected. The Johannesburg-Soweto corridor, the Cape Flats, the townships of Durban South, they were deliberately designed by the apartheid fascists. They can be redesigned to move the country forward. South Korea and Singapore offer models of how to deal with this sort of planning, how they can reshape urban economies within a generation.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for us.
A second structural change is regulatory. South Africa's labor laws are designed to protect workers in formal employment, but the effect has been to make formal employment expensive and risky, encouraging firms to use capital rather than labor, or to rely on informal and contract part-time arrangements. A long-term reform program must find a way to protect worker rights while dramatically lowering the cost and risk of hiring. A quick one would be to get rid of minimum wage, particularly for entry-level and low-skilled workers. The labor market, in which 42% of people cannot find any work, is not protecting workers. It is failing them.
Me personally, I wouldn't take this level of disrespect.
A third lever we need to pull is industrialization. South Africa's deindustrialization since the 90s removed one of the most historically reliable pathways to absorbing low-cost skilled workers into productive employment. A strategic industrial policy, not the command economy variety like that of socialists and the like, but the kind of targeted support for key sectors that South Korea and Singapore practiced. This can rebuild manufacturing capacity in labor-intensive areas where South Africa has comparative advantages, such as agricultural processing, construction materials, clothing and textiles, energy and light manufacturing for the African market and beyond. The African Continent Free Trade Agreement is one of those things that is meant to create genuine opportunity. South Africa sits as the gateway to a market of 1.4 billion people because South Africa has always been, whether this agreement is used by South Africa or not, South Africa has always been the gateway to Africa, and a well-crafted industrial strategy could position it to supply that market with manufactured goods. South Korea reduced its unemployment rate from over 20% in the 1950s to under 5%. Through a combination of deliberate industrial policy, massive education investment, and spatial development of secondary cities, the process took 4 decades of consistent cross-party commitment. South Africa's challenge is different in character. The cause is structural inequality rather than underdevelopment, but the lesson holds: long-term, sustained, coordinated efforts, which means no Banyaza Lesufri need apply.
I had to go to a certain hotel so that I have to go to my commitment.
The second priority, energy security. The 30-year goal in South Africa around energy should be to build a diversified, reliable and affordable energy system that meets South Africa's growing needs, which eliminates load shedding permanently and positions South Africa as a regional energy exporter. South Africa stands at a rare historical moment in its energy transition. It could use this opportunity of all these years of load shedding and underperformance at Eskom and the like to say, okay, seeing that we have messed up the energy system, let's really build it up, but do it right, so that for the next 100 to 500 years, we have the best energy system in the world. It gives us the opportunity to do that if we had leadership that was thinking for the future. You could simultaneously close the chapter on Eskom's failure and broaden the energy supply and make it more dependable for the next 500 years where you are exporting energy. Getting this transition right is important, ensuring the shift away from working in a political way to working in the sort of way that is best for economic growth. This is a complex planning challenge, but it has been done. The immediate priority is completing Eskom's restructuring and establishing the competitive wholesale electricity market. This means separating generation from transmission, allowing independent power producers to sell directly into the grid, establishing transparent price signals, and ensuring that municipalities have both the financial capacity and regulatory incentives to invest in grid maintenance. None of this is easy. It requires overcoming the resistance of entrenched interests, but the current structure has failed, and reform cannot be deferred any further because the country is dying, and a country without energy is a dead country. South Africa has the natural resource of hydrogen.
With its abundant sun, minerals like platinum, and human innovation capacity, South Africa is the ideal place for the production of hydrogen gas. Extracted from water in its purest form, it can be derived from any water body, including the ocean. It's done through a process of electrolysis with energy generated from renewable sources such as sun or wind. In gas form, it can be run through a fuel cell, like a battery, and can be used to generate electricity. But its greatest potential in South Africa currently is to operate vehicles like taxis, buses, and other diesel and petrol-operated modes of transport.
And if we plan properly, we could take advantage of that going into the future, combined with an existing chemical engineering expertise, port infrastructure, proximity to European markets that will be paying premium prices for clean hydrogen by the 2030s. This gives South Africa a genuine opportunity to become a major exporter of hydrogen. Germany, Japan have already signaled strong interest. A national green hydrogen strategy backed by long-term investment in the Northern Cape and along the coasts could create a new export industry comparable in scale to South Africa's current mineral exports. The third priority, water security.
This is fine.
Over the next 30 years, we need to ensure universal access to reliable, safe drinking water for all South Africans by 2040. We need to build resilience against a projected 20 to 60% reduction in water availability in the Western Cape and other regions by 2070. South Africa's water challenge has 3 distinct components that require 3 distinct planning streams. The first is supply augmentation. The large-scale infrastructure projects already underway or planned, including the Lesotho Highlands Phase 2 and the KwaZulu-Natal coastal schemes, must be completed on time and on budget, which requires the kind of rigorous project governance that has been consistently absent from the ANC government. Ring-fencing water revenue at the municipal level, ensuring that money paid for water is used for water infrastructure rather than diverted to other municipal spending, is the single most important structural reform in the sector. Without it, no amount of bulk supply investment will translate into reliable household water supply, nor is approach to creating financially independent, professionally managed utilities insulates from local political interference. This offers us a model to work from. The third component is demand management. South Africa must begin treating water as a finite strategic resource it is, and we used to be quite good at this actually. This means investing in water recycling and reuse, where South Africa already has significant technical expertise. We can deal with this crisis. We already have the expertise and the people to do so. This is about neglect. ANC is ill-equipped to build the future of this country. The fourth priority for South Africa needs to be education. We need to be investing in the next generation. For the next 30 years, we need to build a world-class, universally accessible education system that equips every South African child, regardless of race, class, or geography, with the skills needed to be a productive member of society, to live a dignified life in a modern economy, achieving literacy and numeracy rates comparable in middle-income global peers or above within 15 years. This is quite achievable. Use a decentralized schooling system, using public-private partnerships between schools and encouraging homeschooling. Finland transformed its education system over 3 decades through a process that South Africa can learn from directly. The key was not primarily money, but it was reimagining the teaching profession.
Okay.
It was a willingness to maintain consistent policy over multiple government terms. South Africa has the institutional capacity to do the same. It has universities producing educational researchers of world-class quality. It has the businesses that can start private schools. It has a legion of millennial people who are educated, and it has the technological advancement to start teaching our people in different ways, wherever they may be in this country. With facilitators, with teachers, however you get it done, as long as they are educated. Long-term planning here is crucial. That's why Angie Motshekga and others have failed, because that's what the ANC fails at, long-term planning to the benefit of South Africans. The most urgent need in education is what should have been done years ago, eliminating every remaining pit latrine in every school and ensuring that every school has reliable water, electricity, sanitation, and the facilities it needs. Why are children in South Africa still playing in dusty sand patches? There's no need for playgrounds to be like that in South Africa, because we have the financial impetus and technical skill to be able to have all our schools upgraded and their facilities up to par with each other, no matter where the school is. This shouldn't be some long-term aspiration. This should be basic standard for our students for building a country, for building a state. The ANC has failed to deliver on this as well. It must be treated as a non-negotiable national commitment with a fixed deadline, independent monitoring, and real accountability for failure for it to work. Beyond infrastructure, the transformative long-term investment is in the quality of status of teaching. Following Finland's example, South Africa should over the next decade systematically raise the entry requirements for teacher training, improve teacher pay and conditions, and redesign the teacher training curriculum to reflect what research shows works in diverse, multilingual, under-resourced classrooms. This will not produce immediate results in reading and math scores. The Finnish transformation took over 25 years to show up fully in international assessments. But I'm telling you, with today's technology and what we could innovate for ourselves using this as a guideline, we could do it in less than 25 years. But it will take the sort of commitment ANC politicians don't have.
We were building
a commitment to the people of South Africa, its children, and the future. Because when you look at what schools were producing under the apartheid regime, South Africa had some of the best schools in the world, and the former Model C schools are still producing some of the best people in the world. Early childhood development deserves special emphasis. The evidence from global research is overwhelming. Investments in the first 5 years of life produce higher returns than any other educational investment. We need to be investing in these so that they become better than anywhere else in the world. But South Africa should plan to expand quality early childhood development to all children from birth to school age within 20 years. This single investment, more than any other, has the power to begin breaking intergenerational cycles of poverty and cognitive disadvantage. At the tertiary level, the skills mismatch between what South African universities produce and what the labor market needs must be addressed through a deliberate skills planning process. South Korea's Economic Planning Board regularly assessed future skills needs and shaped university enrollment accordingly. South Africa needs a comparable function. We can't have all our kids studying politics, feminism, and the diaspora. We need some maths, we need some science, we need some computers, and we need TVET colleges for people who can paint, build, fix, and maintain things. An independent national skills planning body that projects long-term labor market demand, coordinates with universities and technical vocational education and training colleges, and guides the strategic development of human capital in this country for a better country. Banyaza can't handle this. Priority 5, safety and security.
The directive issued by President Cyril Ramaphosa was that the defense will work and assist the police. So it's the police who will identify which hotspots areas need attention of both police and the defense.
We need to reclaim the streets, and for the next 30 years, our goal should be to reduce the murder rate by 50% within 15 years and achieve developed world safety standards within the next 30 years. Crime is out of control in this country. We need to restore public trust in law enforcement, creating communities where children can grow up without the traumatizing effect of chronic violence. Crime in South Africa is not primarily a policing problem. It is the symptom of a society under extreme structural stress.
So that is what we want as South Africa.
Mass unemployment, spatial isolation, drug taking, weak social cohesion, broken families, and a criminal justice system that has been systematically compromised by corruption and state capture. A genuine long-term plan for safety must address these roots while also reforming the institutions of law enforcement, prosecution, and correction.
South Africa is a movie.
The first and most important intervention is the one that does not look like a crime policy at all, addressing unemployment. The Institution of Security Studies has documented a strong historical correlation between governance quality and crime rates in South Africa. When governance improves, when people have economic stakes in their communities, when public institutions function, crime rates fall. This is the most important long-term lever. Within the criminal justice system, the most urgent reform is the depoliticization and professionalism of the South African police service. A sustained program of police reform, better recruitment, better training, better pay, better accountability mechanisms, and a systemic removal of corrupt and incompetent officers will not produce results in one term of office. It requires a 10 to 15-year program of institutional rebuilding of the kind that requires cross-party commitment and independent oversight. And I would say we should also look at what El Salvador has done and do it quickly.
For a long time, El Salvador held the record for the world's highest homicide rate. It's now one of the safest places in the world. What most tourists don't know is that bars and surf lessons here were unthinkable just 3 years ago, before the state of emergency was declared. Salvadorans no longer fear crime, but that doesn't mean they have nothing to fear. 3 years ago, President Bukele imposed a form of martial law on El Salvador's 6 million citizens. El Salvador had experienced a period of respite after 20 years of civil war, which left 90,000 dead and missing. Then came 20 years of organized crime. Thousands were killed. Bukele ordered the army and police to take back control of the streets. Tens of thousands were arrested, and the gangs were shut down.
Both countries have dramatically reduced crime. South Africa's Constitutional Court has consistently upheld strong legal frameworks. The challenge is translating legal commitments into operational reality. Priority 6, Governance Reform.
We are here from the ANC, one love, one family, from the ANC.
Over the next 30 years, we need to build a professional, capable, and accountable state in reality at national, provincial, and municipal levels that consistently delivers services and manages public resources with integrity. Reduce corruption from a systemic feature of public life to an exception that is reliably detected and punished, like it so often is in countries like Australia and New Zealand. Every other priority in a long-term plan actually depends on making sure your government works properly. You cannot build a reliable energy system, deliver clean water, transform education, or reduce crime without a state that can design and implement policy, procure goods and services without corruption, maintain infrastructure, and hold officials accountable. South Africa's governance crisis is not a surface feature of its problem. It is the root from which most of the other problems grow. The single most important governance reform is the professionalization of the public services at all levels. This means competitive, merit-based recruitment, transparent performance management. South Korea's achievement of world-class bureaucratic capacity, the economic planning board that drove its development, was not an accident. It was a product of decades of deliberate investment in the quality standards and culture of public administration. At the municipal level, the dysfunction is so severe that incremental reform may be insufficient. Many municipalities are beyond the capacity to reform from within. South Africa should consider a national program of municipal capacity intervention modeled on how companies in crisis are placed under administration, where persistently failing municipalities are temporarily managed by professional administrators with the explicit goal of rebuilding systems and capacity before returning control to elected officials. This is a significant step, but the alternative is leaving millions of citizens without water, electricity, and basic services indefinitely. The National Prosecuting Authority's track record of prosecuting high-level corruption has been inconsistent. Building a genuinely independent, resourced, and effective prosecution capability is a multi-decade project, and we need the people who are being corrupt now to be prosecuted as well, and not just let go. Critically, it requires a political commitment to protect prosecutors from interference, a commitment that must be institutionalized rather than dependent on the goodwill of individual leaders. We have a lesson here from Singapore. Singapore's transformation from a corruption-ridden colonial city to one of the world's least corrupt states took approximately 20 years of consistent, uncompromising anti-corruption enforcement under Lee Kuan Yew.
You know, Singapore back then was one of the most corrupt nations in the world. In fact, they had a rate card on how much bribe is needed to be paid to escape an illegal activity. So you could just pay $20 and run an illegal gambling den, just like the Hafta system in India. On top of that, Singapore saw massive communal riots, 70% of population lived in overcrowded slums, and the Singapore River smelled of rotting garbage just like the nalas in Mumbai today. And most of its population lived in abject poverty.
Singapore is just a slum-ridden, overcrowded port. 75% of families live in shacks or squatter huts without toilets or running water.
For Singapore, forging an identity and finding stability, security, and success was not going to come easy.
A country that looks less like a nation and more like a failed state waiting to collapse.
And then came a hero who is even today considered as one of the greatest leaders in modern history. His name was Lee Kuan Yew.
10 years from now, this will be a metropolis. Never fear.
The key elements were high public sector salaries, removing financial incentives for corruption, an independent anti-corruption agency with genuine investigative powers, and a political commitment to prosecute the powerful equally with the powerless. South Africa has the legal framework. It needs the sustained will, or what people call political will.
One love, one family from the ANC. Ne?
The seventh priority, redesigning the inherited landscape. Over the next 30 years, South Africa's cities and towns need to be transformed from spatially segregated configurations of the fascist apartheid regime into well-ordered, integrated, interconnected, economically diverse communities where proximity to opportunity is not determined by race or class, as it was in the past and as the ANC has kept it. We need to reduce the effective economic cost of distance between township residents and economic centers by 70% within 30 years or less. The spatial legacy of apartheid is perhaps often underappreciated as a constraint on South Africa's development. The deliberate placement of black and colored townships far from urban economic centers imposed massive costs on the majority of South Africans. This is physical separation from economic opportunities for communities and the shared spaces that build social cohesion. These spatial patterns were not natural. They were engineered and they were re-engineered. We need to do something about them to get our economy and our people moving. A national spatial plan must address three interconnected problems simultaneously. The first is public transport, building the mass transit connections that make it possible for township residents to access the full economic geography of their cities at a cost and time burden that does not consume their economic lives. The BRT systems piloted in Johannesburg and Cape Town were steps in the right direction, but operated at wholly insufficient scales. What is needed is a genuine metropolitan rail network, using where possible the infrastructure that already exists and extending it into the townships.
One love, one family from the ANC. Ne?
The second problem is land, ensuring that affordable housing development happens on well-located land close to economic activity, not on the urban periphery where land is cheap but economic access is minimal. This requires a national land use planning regime. This, of course, has to be done smartly. It calls for some strategic development. The third problem is economic activation of existing township spaces. South Africa has invested too little in building economic infrastructure, such as markets, commercial premises, light industrial space, digital connectivity in the townships themselves. Instead of assuming that township residents must travel to economic activity, rather than economic activity happening where they already live, a long-term spatial plan must reverse this assumption, investing in making townships themselves into productive economic spaces rather than merely dormitory suburbs. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description. So how do you make a long-term plan like this stick?
One love, one family from the ANC. Ne?
Definitely not under the management of Gwede Mantashe, that fat fool. The most important question about any long-term plan is not whether its priorities are correct, but whether its implementation architecture is robust enough to survive the inevitable political transitions, budget pressures, and competing priorities of the decades ahead. South Africa has no shortage of strategic plans, actually. The National Development Plan alone runs to hundreds of pages. What it has consistently lacked is the institutional design needed to implement and sustain those plans across political cycles.
They're very good at diagnosing the problem, very good at analyzing and coming up with beautifully worded and rich in policy documents and everything else. But when it comes to implementation, it's like something is not happening.
The central institutional innovation South Africa needs is a national planning commission with genuine independence, statutory authority, and long-term security of tenure. That's the difference between our planning commissions and that of South Korea. Such a body, similar to some respect to the independent financial advisory councils that has proven effective in the United Kingdom, Sweden, and elsewhere, would maintain a long-term plan across governments, track progress against its targets, publish independent assessments of whether current policy is consistent with long-term goals, and provide a form of institutional memory that prevents each new administration from reinventing the wheel or abandoning commitments made by predecessors. This is distinct from the current National Planning Commission, which is an advisory board without enforcement powers and whose membership changes with governments. Basically, that's just a jobs for pals scheme. The body that I'm proposing would need statutory authority to publish independent assessment, access to all government data. We need to be one of the most, if not the first, data-driven country in the world, and a membership structure with fixed, staggered terms that insulated from electoral cycles. Long-term plans require long-term funding commitments. South Africa needs to develop a financial framework that distinguishes clearly between current consumption spending and long-term capital investment. This is harder than it sounds in a country with South Africa's levels of need. The pressure to spend available resources on immediate welfare rather than long-term investment is genuinely powerful. The resolution of this tension is not just to skip to not giving people money, it is to grow the economy fast enough to fund both, and to restructure and reform how you spend your money, but in the interim, a fiscal rule that ring-fences a minimum level of public investment with parliamentary oversight and independent auditing would create at least a partial protection against the tendency of long-term investment to be the first casualty of budget pressures. Norway's rule that only the real returns on the oil fund may be spent is the gold standard. South Africa's version would need to be adapted to a much more constrained fiscal reality, but the principle still applies. Making certain commitments structurally resistant to political pressure is the idea here. It needs to be real to the citizen, this plan. A long-term plan that citizens cannot easily track and evaluate is a plan that will not generate the public support needed to survive political transitions, because it's not really real at that point. South Africa should develop a public dashboard, simple, accessible, updated annually, that tracks progress against the 7 priorities using a small number of easily understood indicators: employment rate, school literacy rate, days of load shedding, murder rate, access to clean water, municipal audit outcomes. These numbers, presented transparently and consistently, would create a form of public accountability for long-term progress that transcends the elections that happen every 5 years. Civil society has a crucial role to play here, holding governments accountable not just to their election manifestos, but to the country's long-term needs, is one of the most important contributions citizens can make to the long-term plan's success. An example would be an organization like ALTA.
And it hammered home what we've been saying for years at ALTA, that when the chain of command and discipline breaks, corruption rushes in to just fill this vacuum. And we need to get discipline back into our administration.
Perhaps reviewing local governments all over the country. If I was president, I would go as far as to say, for the first couple of years, ALTA should have an office in every metro or every ward and have representatives there that assess local governments. The politicians need to stay out of the way. The 2024 elections produced a government of national unity, a coalition that includes the ANC, the Democratic Alliance, and other parties representing the majority of South African voters. However, in some way, an opportunity to keep the country stable until the real transition to a proper party of millennial conservatives. At least that's one person's dream. Whoever leads the country going forward needs to actually abide to the rule of the long-term plan, that they need to implement and keep implementing and maintaining the long-term plan. This has been modeled in Finland and Norway and maintained consistently over the long term, and the strategy from government to government has been sustained. This would be the single most powerful institutional innovation available to South Africa to keep a long-term plan in place. It could even be a formal agreement that parties have to sign on so that we are committed to a specific long-term plan of 30 to 50 years for this country, and you cannot interrupt it. Perhaps it may be a good thing. I suppose it depends on the long-term plan. It would require them to agree on a small number of fundamental long-term national goals, reducing unemployment, securing water and energy, transforming education, rebuilding governance. They wouldn't need to lie to people because they're already locked in. It's understood that if you run for politics in this country and for high office, you're committing to those. Those are standard. You have to deliver the services. You don't need to lie to people about that because we've all agreed you have to do it anyway. And a commitment not to actively undermine progress towards these goals when in opposition. In essence, it would be a commitment to compete vigorously on how to achieve the nation's long-term goals, rather than on whether to pursue them at all.
If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.
South Africa does have genuine advantages and resources, such as national resilience, that make the long-term plan that a country could forge under the right leaders possible. South Africa's financial system is among the most sophisticated in the world, with deep capital markets, a credible central bank, and banking sector that has survived multiple global crises in good health. Its legal system, while under pressure, retains genuine independence and the respect of the international community. Its universities, despite the challenges they face, produce researchers and professionals of genuine world quality. Its agricultural sector, often overlooked, is a model of productive, private sector-driven development, and its status as the world's second-largest citrus exporter reflects genuine comparative advantage. Geographically, South Africa occupies an exceptional position, the gateway to sub-Saharan Africa and Africa, with the best ports if they were fixed, the best logistical infrastructure, and the best financial services on the continent. It is the gateway of Africa. The African Continental Free Trade Area, if it can be made functional or without it, would give South Africa access to a market of 1.4 billion people. No other country on the continent is better positioned to be the manufacturing and services hub of that market. We could be the Singapore of Africa and beyond, actually. Politically, South Africa demonstrated in 1994 that it is capable of extraordinary transformation when it chooses to be. The generation that negotiated the end of apartheid, that chose reconciliation over retribution and democracy over revolution, did us a favor, actually. We didn't need to throw each other into the sea. If anything, we've gained a legion of millennials and Generation Z that are highly educated. But they are frustrated, and much of the hope of 1994 has been deferred and tested by failures of governance and delivery, the sort of people that can't plan long term. The potential is still there, waiting to be mobilized again by a leadership worthy of it. South Africa also has an exceptional amount of natural resources. Its mineral deposits, including significant reserves of the critical mineral needed for batteries, fuel cells, and other energy technologies, is well known. This positions South Africa as a potentially indispensable supplier to the global market. Platinum, manganese, vanadium, I bet you don't even know what that is. Chrome, these are some of the materials South Africa has, and many more. I mean, this place was built on gold, and South Africa has all of these things and many more in abundance. A long-term plan that connects this resource wealth to the domestic and regional economy rather than simply exporting raw materials could be the foundation for a new industrial revolution in this country. South Africa has every resource it needs to change and to grow, except so far the sustained political commitment to plan for a long-term future. And you can't leave that to Pemi Majodina.
And surely we don't have that amount.
We have a choice as South Africa. Even though we have the formidable challenges, they are quite solvable. They are solvable because some of them are easy and some of them aren't. But they're solvable because they've been solved before in other countries and the methods are quite clear. And some of our challenges compared to the challenges people have somewhere else in other countries are quite small. We actually have a lot of benefits. some of those benefits coming by the way of the fascist apartheid government. The evidence from how countries have developed all over the world shows clearly that nations can transform themselves within a generation when they commit to long-term planning, invest in institutions that protect that planning from short-term political pressure, and maintain the discipline to execute over the decades required. The choice before South Africa in 2026, and especially in 2029, is a very important one. The country can continue as it has been, trapped in a cycle of short-term political competition, deferred reforms, and the management of crises as they arrive, and leaving the country to people like Paul Mashatile. If it does, the trajectory of the past 2 decades, declining per capita, rising unemployment, deteriorating infrastructure, deepening despair and sadness and dysfunction and filth, will continue. The children born in South Africa today will inherit a country more troubled than one ever before. My hope is that as South Africans, we begin to choose differently. We can choose to ask the questions that matter most, not what color so-and-so who said such and such a thing is, but what kind of country do we want to be in 2056? Not just about how we win the next elections, but how we build institutions strong enough to carry the nation forward regardless of who wins the election.
We are here from the ANC, one love, one family, from the ANC. ANC, there is life, so one love means a lot.
Not how do we manage the crisis, but how do we build the foundations so that the next generation does not face the same crisis.
That people think that if there is no water, ourselves, our families, we've got special water. We don't. We also go through, in some instances, I had to go to a certain hotel so that I have to go to my commitment.
They are the questions that took Finland from educational mediocrity to the top of the world rankings. They are the questions that allowed Norway to convert its oil wealth into permanent national prosperity rather than temporary consumption. They are the questions that any parent asks on behalf of their children, applied at national scale with institutional discipline and long-term commitment. They are the questions that change nations.
Okay.
South Africa's people have already shown 30 years ago that they are capable of choosing the harder but better path. The transition of 1994 was, among other things, an act of collective long-term thinking. And we need to adopt that long-term thinking again. No matter what you think of what South Africa has become in the last 30 years, the decision made in the early 90s was the correct one. What happened afterwards was the problem, not that decision. A decision to invest in a democratic future whose dividends were uncertain rather than settling the scores of the past, no matter how hard it was to swallow, was correct. No matter how hard it is to swallow because of what the ANC has done now, the decision still remains correct. We need to have a mind to build.
One love, one family.
The trees planted today will grow slowly. Their shade will not cool the planters, but it will shelter the children. And for a nation that has suffered as much as South Africa has, that is a reason enough to begin. Amen.
Thank you for listening. If you dare, buy us a coffee. The link is in the description.